going to be. Well, hello everybody. This is Nils, and I'm happy to be here with my webinar about, what is it about? Here it is. How to make your presentation 10 times better in an hour with no design skills needed. That's what the title is. And there I go doing something that I often tell people not to do. I was reading my slide. But the goal here is to give you some ideas about how to improve your persuasion skills by doing some real simple things with your presentations that will make them more effective. And so I'm doing this. This is the first time I've done a YouTube live, so it's a little bit of an experiment. I'm going to see if anybody's online. I don't see anybody, but that's fine. It's just the way it's going to be. Hopefully hopefully my voice and video are synced up. I did a little bit of settings on that. But again, let me know if you see a problem with that and anything else as we go through with the slides. And so you're going to see me looking at some different windows as we go through because I've got kind of different monitors happening. And you also are going to see when I move my hands around, a little green screen. I've got a green screen back here. I don't actually have a really nice wall behind me. What I have behind me is a mess. And so I use a little green screen to make it look better. Anyway, but it means when I move my hands around, there's some green. Anyway, that's kind of funny. I think it's funny. It amuses me as a producer of videos that presumably are meant to be, somewhat semi-professional. Well, I'm doing it in my garage, so how professional can they really be? Anyway, let's get started with this topic of how to make your presentations 10 times better. And let's talk a little bit about why I think that is a good idea. And so I'm going to show myself up right there as well. So why is it that we want to do that? How do we do it? What are the steps I'm going to show you? I'm going to show you some steps. I'm going to give you a little bonus at the end of some additional ideas. And then I'll summarize that whole thing and give you some additional actions to take. But the bottom line is, why are we doing this? Well, persuasion is this really big thing right now. Everybody knows that the next really important, big, in-demand soft skill, as it says here, this is from some LinkedIn research, is of the top 5, persuasion is one of them, basically. Employers want their people to be effective at persuasion because so much of what we do in all the different aspects of whether you're a product manager or you're a salesperson or you're in marketing or whatever, it's all about persuasion, getting people to align with you, to make decisions that are in your favor, to basically, you use these persuasion capabilities all the time. You use them for getting people to fund a project or fund a new feature that you want to build. You obviously use them for sales, persuasion skills all the time. And the world out there is saying that persuasion is a big important thing and we need more of it, is basically what they're saying, right? And in fact, this person says, and this guy's, you can take what he says with a grain of salt, but he says that, we don't even think of them as soft skills anymore. These are the skills, not that soft skills weren't always really important, but the soft skills are, public speaking is a soft skill that you have to have in order to be successful in any business role. And again, doesn't have to be sales, doesn't have to be executive. All of us have to do public speaking all the time. And if we can learn to do it better, it's going to be a lot of advantages to us. So I have done a number of articles and blog posts and other videos about persuasion in general. And I've got a set of tips. You might have seen these a few weeks ago, I put these out on Twitter, but I'll just quickly go through them, right? So one of the things that helps you be more persuasive is if you have a goal and you know what it is, and then you work toward that goal in your persuasion. Because what are you trying to persuade somebody about? What are you trying to get the audience to agree to, or to something like that? It might even be that you don't want them to fire you. You know, maybe you're presenting about, maybe your goal is to present something about a failure, or something that went wrong with a project, and you just don't want them to fire you. That's a goal. What you really don't want to do is just go in there with all your information, just sort of throw it out on the wall to see what happens. That's not going to work. It never has worked in the past, and it's really a bad thing to do. So another persuasion tip: use stories, not just facts. Now, I haven't used much in the way of stories. I have a few stories in this presentation because this is really this is more about how to, and how to doesn't always require the stories. But the number one rule of persuasion: people make decisions with their emotions, and then they justify the decisions rationally. So if you're asking people to make a decision either in your favor or not against you, stories are a really great way to do that. And so, for example, if you're thinking about trying to get somebody to fund a new feature, you're a product manager, that's what I do all the time, get your executives to fund a new feature. Well, you want to be able to tell a story about the prospects who are suffering because they don't have that feature. And the story would also include about how when you have a solution to that feature, it's going to be really valuable for them, and you're going to beat your competitors. So there's some particular kinds of structures of stories that are really great for this kind of way. Now, another thing is pre-handling objections, so that you, as the presenter, you put yourself in your audience's shoes. You figure out what they're going to be worried about, what they're going to be concerned about, what they see as risks, and you make sure you address those proactively in your presentation. You want to use conversational language, and actually it's pretty easy to use conversational language if you think about it, but it's also pretty easy not to. There's two basic things you need to do to use conversational language. One is to use the word you a lot, because what you want to do is you want to engage the audience and get through that brain filter that they have against new information and against getting involved. And one of the ways you do that is by having a conversation, because our human brains are good at conversations. We're tuned to that. So if you ask people questions and if you say you a lot, it actually engages them. Open-ended questions are the best to get people's brain filter to fall down. This doesn't mean you can do it all the time, but it's better than using technical or academic language. You also want to give your audience an idea of the path they're going to have to follow, maybe the obstacles they're going to run into, and how you're going to get around them or over them. And you'll see me doing that a little bit in this presentation. You know, if your audience is worried about problems that you're not talking about, that worry is going to make them less likely to be receptive to what you're trying to get them. Now, the final tip is to practice. This is really one of the best ways to get your message across, because one of the things that makes you more persuasive is confidence. One of the things that makes you more persuasive is being smooth. One of the things that makes you more persuasive is being well organized and not seeming like you've never seen your slides before. And we've certainly seen that, and we all suffer from that, but if we can minimize it, it's better. So practicing is the way that you minimize that, by going through your slides multiple times, your presentation, organizing it, starting to organize it into better order, things like that. You're going to be much better at being smooth, at being conversational, at being in your own voice, at acting as though you know what you're talking about. So those are the persuasion tips that I tweeted about last week. Now I'm going to talk about the secret persuasion tip number 0, and I'm seeing that my slide is fractured here. I wonder if that's what it looks like to you guys. Let us see. It does. It looks totally fractured. So this slide actually has words on it. Let me see if I can get those words to come up. Let me switch back here. Let me do this, and I'm going to do this. I have to goof around with PowerPoint. This sometimes happens when I'm streaming. But let's see if we can make this look better. There we go. Okay, back to the PowerPoint. So, persuasion tip number 0. Maybe you can think of this as number 0. Look and sound your best. So, you know, the way you look, I mentioned this. If you're confident, if you're relaxed, if you're prepared, that carries a lot of weight. And that's true for your presentation as well, not just true for you. And so the things we're going to do through our presentations today, the thing I'm going to show you how to do, is going to help make your presentation look better. It won't look fantastic, but it'll look better. Because if it looks sloppy, it's going to make you less persuasive, and that's what we're trying to avoid, is being less persuasive. So, sounds great. Now, I am here monitoring the comments as people say things on the chat. I don't know who all is watching, but if you want to chime in on the comments, it'd be great. I'd love to see how that works. And so go ahead and add any comments or questions. If you think of them as we go through, I'll try to handle, of course, a lot of them because I've tried to anticipate them. But what we're going to do now is I'm going to go into the actual steps of how not to be sloppy. So what I'm really trying to give you here is what I call the minimum effective dose. And this is not my own term. This is a term from Tim Ferriss, who you might know from the 4-Hour Workweek or something like that. He has a great podcast, a great book called The 4-Hour Body, where he talks about this idea of the minimum effective dose. And the way you can think about it also is something like the Pareto principle or the 80-20 rule. In other words, what's the minimum amount of work you can do to get most of the effect? Now, you might not get all of the effect, which takes a lot more work, but you can get, with a small amount of work, you can get a lot of the effect. That's what the 80-20 rule is about. And this is really addressing very common problems that I see all the time with presentations. The steps are really quite mechanical, and they're not related to the content of your message. So I'm not telling you how to give your message better, except in the sense that it's going to look better because you're going to fix some of these mechanical problems. And it's making it essentially more functional, not more beautiful. Except that, as I keep saying, sloppiness is unbeautiful. So it does actually contribute to a beauty. It's just not going to be beautiful. I'm not going to tell you how to design a beautiful presentation. You can see what I like. I like bullets on a slide, on a decent template, in a decent set of fonts. I like bullets. And that's what works for and is appropriate for lots of things you're going to be presenting. You don't have to be a designer. You're going to this is going to take your slides often from not very good to pretty good. So, if you think about it in terms of grades, from C- to a solid B. And that's what we're going for with these steps. So the normal process, if you go through this, is, you get the corporate template, and I could do a whole presentation or webinar about your corporate template and what you should do with that. But you're going to get the corporate template, or you're going to use a PowerPoint template, or maybe one that you've developed. You're going to struggle with the content. You're going to put in stuff that you already have. Typically what people do is they write an essay in kind of a bullet form, and then they tweak that a lot, and then they present it. Now, it depends on how good of essay writers there are, but a lot of people are not that good, and they don't think of it as being an essay. They think about it as, here's a bunch of information I'm going to give people. They do a lot of tweaking, then they present it, and it doesn't come off that well, right? So the process that I'm going to talk about is I'm going to replace that tweak. And we have another really beautiful kind of decoration on our PowerPoint. I'm going to replace that tweak with specific steps. So 3 specific steps: the formatting check, the content check, and the practice. At least one practice out loud. And you can see how this is different from continuously tweaking. It's more organized, it's more structured, and it ends up with, I think, a better outcome that looks more beautiful. So let's talk about these things. We think of them, or I call them often, the passes. So it's pass 1, pass 2, and pass 3. And the first pass is about spelling, grammar, and consistency. I'm going to have to do this again. For some reason, the slides are not behaving correctly. Go back one slide. Okay. So the first pass is about formatting and spelling and grammar and consistency. And so, as we all know, beauty is only skin deep, but beauty is important in the world. And in particular, consistency and organization goes a long way to help you look professional. And if you don't do that, if your slides look sloppy, you look unprofessional, and you don't want that. So it pays off to spend some time on these basic things like capitalization, like grammar, like alignment. Now, I noticed as I was going through this that I actually have some capitalization errors in my slides, and I apologize for that because I think it's terrible. But what I've got is I also have some examples. I just did something terrible there. Let me fix that. So there we go. Put that back there. I managed to just grab that screen and move it all the way off screen. But the point is that I have an example of some types of errors that I think can really make your presentation, can really make you look bad when you're presenting. So I'm going to switch over to another slide deck, and hopefully this will work relatively straightforwardly. This is a thing that I've never tried before in OBS. This is the tool I'm using for streaming. So I've got a slide here, and I'm going to now try to get my PowerPoint to use that slide. So I'm going to do that right here. And I'm going to have to switch this back as well, which is too bad, but that's just the way it is. Okay. So there is my slide. Go back over here. So here is what I did also was I took this slide that I got from somebody I know, and I'm sure if he were to look at this slide deck, he would be embarrassed as well. And but I happened to notice it because it had some challenges. And then I have taken all of his words off. I've replaced them with other words that are kind of silly, but they're all business related, like the T-shaped individual. This is from a lorem ipsum generator that generates business buzzwords. So I thought it was kind of funny. But what is wrong with this particular slide? Well, here there's a couple of problems. The first problem is that there's an alignment problem with these bullets. Now, not everybody's going to notice this type of problem, but there are some people that are going to notice, and it's going to make them mad. It's going to make them unhappy. They're going to start feeling like they can't trust you because you didn't pay enough attention to the simple sort of details about your presentation. And if you didn't pay attention to those simple details, then how much are they going to be able to trust you to take care of them, the audience, in terms of what they need as you go through? Now, another example of this is these capitalizations. So all of these bullets are capitalized. All of these bullets are capitalized with sentence case where the first word is capitalized. But these bullets are capitalized with title case. And they're even subordinate to the bullets that are capitalized with sentence case. And that just looks jarring to anybody who sort of pays attention to these things. So don't do that. And what you're doing in your first pass is you're going through and you're saying, oh, look at that. I need to fix my capitalization so it all makes sense. And what I typically do is I suggest the title, the upper part, ramp up T-shaped individuals, that part of the slide, that title part should be capitalized in title case, so every word's capitalized. And then the rest of it should be in sentence case. Maybe the headings can be in title case, like root and branch review in this case. I think generally I don't do that. You can make your own choice, but it should be consistent. It doesn't matter. If you want to capitalize everything, you can do that, but it needs to be consistent. So let's look at another example here. Again, using these business buzzwords, but the issues here, so we've got, again, we've got alignment problems and capitalization problems right over here. So that's another example where just, if I saw this slide, if I saw somebody presenting the slide, it would really annoy me. It would make me think, what do they know? Now, again, you have to ignore the words, which are also annoying, because those are not the real words from this slide. And so the final example here is, these are grammar problems. So one of the things that happens as you copy and paste your slides and you do your tweaking and things is you might end up with losing words or getting verbs to not agree with their subjects anymore. And we've got two examples on this slide. So what are the company's unique capabilities? Well, company is actually should be a possessive, right? So what it's written here is as companies is a plural, but it really is meant to be a possessive. So it should be end in Y''s instead of IES. And then the other example, what unique capability does your provide? Well, it's missing the subject of the sentence, right? What unique capabilities does your company provide, your organization, your product, whatever it might be? And so those are the types of things that can go wrong. And You also see that there's some strange spacing here where there's not much spacing between these two paragraphs, but there's a lot of spacing between these other ones. That also is a little bit of an annoying thing. So those are just some examples of things that I think you need to pay a lot of attention to not have in your presentation, because they make you look sloppy. And if you do that one 10-minute or less pass to make sure that all of your capitalization is right, all your alignment is good, then that's going to make you look a lot better to the people that are watching your slides. So let me go back and get back to the other slides. I think I have to do this. I will talk as I go. So those are some examples. There's other examples, and I happen to have those slides handy, and so I thought they would make some good examples. But you can find lots of other examples in the world, out in the real world, about ways that people have. Okay, I've got to do that again. Sorry. There's lots of other examples of the ways that people have there we go. Okay, that's the one I want. Goodness sakes. Crazy. Sorry for all the learning process as you guys watch this. Let me see if anybody's commenting on how this is going crazily in this way. Nope, nobody said anything. Okay, moving on. So the second pass is related to content. And you're going to see formatting again probably as you go through. But in particular, what I'm talking about, not so much content about the details of what you're saying, but content in, is it organized well? And again, things like, do you have an agenda? So are you know that phrase, tell people what you're going to tell them, and then tell them what you told them. And that's the role of an agenda, obviously, and a summary. And so you saw that I had an agenda slide in this deck, and then I'm telling you a bunch of stuff, and I'll have a summary at the end, of course. But there's also this idea of sections. One of the things that helps people accept the information you're giving them is if you put it into chunks. And so you can think about the way that you want to chunk your information, and it helps make sure that it helps in two ways. One is it gives your audience an easier time of internalizing or ingesting the information you're giving them. If you give them sort of, here's a set of information, and it all goes together in this section. And then now we're starting the next section, so you can sort of file all that stuff we just talked about, and we're going to start on a new concept. This is very helpful to people if you can do that. But it also helps you make sure that your flow makes sense, right? Because if you have slides are all about different topics and they're all interspersed, then the flow's not going to be very good as you go through the presentation. And so sectioning also implies flow. Now, I did want to talk a little bit about the slide templates. Because of the challenges with using this streaming app at the moment, I'm not going to go into that. I might at the end show a little bit about, I essentially use 4 slide templates mostly when I'm doing these types of presentations. I use the title card, which is the big one at the beginning that just had the big title on it. I use this format, which is what's called a title and then some content in bullets. I use I think we're almost there. I use the section header, so I just zoomed ahead to show you the section header. And then I sometimes use the slide that has no, I sometimes use a slide that has just the title, just the part up at the top, and I might put I might be pasting an image in or something like that, or a table or something like that. I usually those 4 templates, those are mostly what I use when I'm doing this type of presentation. If I were doing a more fancy presentation, I might do something else. But if I'm doing this type of presentation where I'm trying to get some information across in a reasonably quick way, that's what I use. The most important pass 3. This is the practicing out loud pass, right? It has the biggest impact of all of these passes because you're going to find problems as you go through. You're going to become smoother and more relaxed and more confident. And it's going to help you think about how your audience is going to react, which helps you figure out what they might object to, what their questions will be, and then you can go and handle those. within the presentation or whatever, right? So you are going to be finding problems, and you're going to probably fix them. I would expect you to fix them generally. Not always. You don't always have to fix the problems, but oftentimes you can fix the problems. If you're a little bit unsure about whether you really should change something, an early mentor of mine gave me this great rule when I was doing tech writing. She said, if you can't think of a better way to say this in 10 seconds, then just skip it and go on. Now, you might come back to fix that. And if it's something really big, you might have to spend more than 10 seconds. But oftentimes, if it's just wording, if you can't solve it in 10 seconds, you should just move on. That's a good rule of thumb. So you're going to practice out loud. There's a bunch of things you're going to be looking for as you do this practice. But first, I'm going to talk to you about how you do the practice. So typically what I do, I find an unused conference room. If I'm working from home, it's obviously easy. I just do it at home. You put your PowerPoint into presentation mode, maybe. Actually, all of these are kind of optional. You can either stand up or sit down as you do it. You then start talking out loud. That's the piece that's not optional. You have to talk out loud. You can go as fast as you want. This is not about timing. This is about content and structure and making sure that you know what to say to every slide and you know how things go. Now, if you find problems as you're going, you can fix them, or you can come back and fix them a little bit later. You do want to make sure to fix them. But that's basically what it is. You just do your PowerPoint in presentation mode or not. I actually do it both ways. And you just start talking, and you try to cover all the points, and you're going to learn a few things. So here's some of the things that you want to pay attention to. First of all, you don't want to be reading your bullets. Sometimes it's okay to read your bullets. You can read an occasional bullet. Sometimes the bullet really just says things the best way. But you don't want to do that for every slide. And I have been in many presentations where people read their slides, read their bullets, every single one. It's really annoying, and it makes them sound like they don't really know what they're talking about. They're just reading something that maybe somebody else even wrote. And it's not a good way to be persuasive. So you want to have alternative ways to express the ideas of your bullet. You often, as you go through this process, you can figure out ways to shorten those bullets so that they're no longer sentences, but maybe sentence fragments or just ideas that you then can riff off of. You want to look at whether you're presenting all this stuff in the right order, and if it's chunked effectively, right? Do you have opportunities to put in section headings that are going to help the audience chunk that information and ingest it a little bit better? You want to think about the things that the questions the audience is going to be having, maybe the objections they're going to have as you go through, to make sure that you're addressing those in the course of the presentation or at some point in the presentation, right? So you want to keep remember that your presentation is not about you. It's about getting information or making a persuasive argument to your audience. And so you need to think about what your audience needs from you as opposed to what you want to tell them. And oftentimes you're going to find there's too much information. This certainly is true often in the first draft of a big presentation, that you have too much and you have to cut a lot. Now, this presentation that I'm doing tonight, I think, is probably a little bit too long. I know we've been going for 28 minutes already, and I'm not quite done. I targeted it to be a half an hour, and it just got a little bit too long, and that's just the way it is. Luckily, it's live, so hopefully nobody cares, and later on I'll cut it down into a shorter set of videos that are not as long, perhaps, or that are a little bit more tightened up. But that's what we're talking about. So those are the things you need to pay attention to as you're doing your live practice. Now, you certainly can do multiple live practices. It doesn't hurt. I did multiple live practices on this. But let me just review what we talked about, right? So I talked about 3 passes. The first pass is about your typography, your grammar, your alignment, all the things that make your slides on screen look sloppy. That's what that was really about. The second pass is about, is it overall organized well, and have you sort of chunked it up in a way with sections and so on that are going to help the audience ingest and incorporate and be persuaded by your talk. And then, of course, the third pass is your live practice that you're doing to make sure that you know how to talk about all the things on every slide, and that you've done it a couple times, and that's just going to make you a lot more effective as a presenter. So then let's talk about some of the questions that I'm sure are on your mind, right? So first of all, I'm telling you to do this. Does it really work? Well, it does. I think you can, and I'm not depending on my own knowledge of this works, right? It is true that not everybody notices things like bad typography and whether the alignment is off and whether the capitalization is off. But a lot of people do. And those people, but when they see that kind of stuff, those people think that you don't pay attention to details and that you also probably don't care much about them because you're letting this sloppiness come through. And so it makes you less persuasive, right? It makes them think you're not thinking about the audience. So that is something that is really just, it's worth doing, and it's very easy to do, right? The rules I gave you are very simple. Consistent capitalization, consistent alignment, make use of your template because it knows how to do alignment, generally speaking, and don't have grammar errors. You can have sentence fragments in your bullets, but don't have grammar errors because that just, everybody just gets jarred by that. It upsets people. So what about practicing? Do you really have to practice? Well, yeah, you do. Practicing, I didn't make this rule up that you have to practice. Everybody knows in order to get better at things, you have to practice, right? It has such a significant impact on your success as a presenter that it's really hard to overstate. You just have to do it. What if you don't have time to practice? Well, I don't agree with the premise. If you have time to go have lunch, I think it's worth it if it's an important presentation to go practice instead of having lunch, or to cut lunch short and practice. And it doesn't take that long. If you have a lot of times these are 15-minute presentations that you have to do, or half an hour. That first practice session is going to be 15 minutes long or half an hour because you're going to zoom through it. And you're going to make some improvements and things, but by practicing, you're going to know really, you're going to have some sense of what to say. You're going to practice saying things. You're going to know where the pitfalls are and things like that. So that's what I say about practicing. What if you don't have a private place to practice? Well, you can do it at your desk. Pretend you're on a phone call with a customer or with a prospect or with one of your colleagues. It's a great way to do it. If you're concerned about other people thinking you're crazy for talking out loud, well, just pretend you're presenting it to somebody out there. You don't even have to do it. You can ask the audience questions, see what they think. Of course, they're not going to answer because there's not anybody there. Or you can go practice in your car. There's a lot of opportunities. Now, what if you don't need to practice? Well, typically, if you've already practiced a few times, maybe you've practiced enough. I don't know what don't need to practice means. If you know the material really well, are you really good at presenting it? Even if you know it well, are you good at presenting it? This is a thing that we always have to get better at, that we have the opportunity to get better at. So I would say don't need to practice is not really true. You can always get better at that. And in particular, if you've done the things that I've talked about in these 3 passes, the other thing you can do while you're in your practice is start applying some of the other persuasion tips, like incorporating stories, making sure you're handling objections, etc., stuff like that. What if you don't want your presentation to just be boring bullets? Well, sometimes that's all we have time for. There are some little tricks and things in terms of adding images, and I'm not going to be able to have time to do it tonight, but I'll do another Facebook Live where I show some of the new features of PowerPoint that actually does a really nice job with sort of doing designy things with images that you paste onto your slides. The latest PowerPoint has this cool capability, and so you might want to do that. But if you're not a designer, chances are, and you're not using that cool capability from PowerPoint, chances are adding images will not make it better. Now, adding things like charts and graphs, that might. And pictures are always interesting, but if you think about the really excellent slides, like the ones that people show at TED, those are not just regular slides with pictures on them. Those are designed over a large period of time by some really excellent design people. And so that is something that you're not always ready to step up to. Now, the final question is, what if you have a designer? Well, if you have a designer, then obviously you can probably do more if you have time. But I wouldn't, if you have to get this presentation ready to go pretty quickly, you may not have time to use a designer. So you should use these other techniques. It turns out that simply having well-formatted text and not too much of it, it's kind of a designy thing to do already. So you just think about that. Now, what if your slides are already formatted nicely, your capitalization is consistent, you've practiced? Why should you listen to me? Well, actually, that's a good question. I think you should listen to me because there's tips about persuasion, and you should do some of those things. But aside from that, you may not have to listen to me for this in this particular set of videos. Now, I would say that if you have all those other things handled, then you can really start to focus on things like pre-handling objections. What is your audience going to be concerned about? Try to answer those questions. And so, for example, if you're presenting slides about the status of a project, your audience is going to be concerned about things like schedule overruns or resource capacity, running out of resources. Or if you're talking about some new product stuff, then they might be thinking about, is this going to help the customer be happier, or is it going to address unhappy customers? It's going to make them more satisfied. And so you want to think about all those things. Now, I just had a slide, as you might recall, one slide ago, which was questions and objections. And I tried to think, well, what are some things that people are going to want to know about this stuff that I just presented? So I wrote down those questions and then I answered them, right? And now sometimes you're going to know the answer. Now, I knew the answer for most of those, or I gave you an answer. And so I answered those. Now, sometimes you don't know the answer to an objection. And then you can say, well, here's how we're going to figure out the answer, right? So a lot of times in real business situations, you may not know the answer. You may know that there's going to be a question, but you don't know the answer. And so you should be prepared either to answer that question if it actually comes up, or ideally address it within the presentation itself, right? So you want to be pre-handling objections. It's a really valuable thing to do. So how are you going to use this? Well, obviously you're going to follow these 3 steps. You're going to go through these 3 passes of formatting check, content check, and practice out loud. You're going to apply the persuasion tips, particularly once you get past those things. And then you're going to try to learn more about persuasion by watching my other videos on persuasion. I have several of them up on YouTube. Or listen to my podcasts. I have a couple podcasts about persuasion techniques, and I have a lot of blog posts that are related to persuasion and things like how to sell better, which of course really intimately related to persuasion as well. And you might consider signing up for my course on persuasion, or getting at least on the mailing list. I'll have a course probably in Q2 of this year, 2019, about persuasion. You can go to secretpmhandbook.com/persuasion to get on the mailing list. I'll send you a little bonus ebook with a little bit more information about those top 6 persuasion tips, and I recommend doing that. Now, if you've liked this video, if you've enjoyed it, I'd love to have you hit that like button. I'd love to get your comments and questions if you're watching this after the live video. Certainly, comments and questions and likes are also great. And if you have any questions or concerns, you can ask them right now in the comments section of the YouTube Live, or you can ask them later in comments, and I'll keep checking these if you're watching this after the live video, if you're watching the recording. So that is it for what I have today. I'd love to hear what you're thinking and how you're feeling about what I presented. And if you have additional tips and easy things to do that are mechanical and are part of that sort of 80-20 minimum effective dose, love to hear those. But without any further ado, I think it's time for me to sign off. So I'll be stopping the stream right now. And I hope you enjoyed this and learned something.